It's time to make it, just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Thank you for coming to this episode of You Can Make It. I'm David Farrell. Today I'm going to make something special, a real treat. It's called candied salmon. Smoked candied salmon has been around for generations, and it is something that is a treat that has been loved by all those generations. There's a reason it has always been so popular. I've got some really nice wild sockeye salmon that I've picked up to make today's candied salmon. And with no further ado, let's get to it. The first thing you do when you make candied salmon is you brine it. So we have to make a brine. And we're starting off with my brine, which is 3/4 of a cup or 175 milliliters of water and 125 milliliters or half a cup of brown sugar. Now that's for 1 pound of salmon. If you have 2 pounds, double it. If you have half a pound, which I do for this piece, cut it in half. But I've mixed the brown sugar and the water together in this bowl. And then we're going to add some seasonings to it. And we're going to add 3 milliliters of dried ginger. We're going to add 2 dried bay leaves, 40 milliliters of kosher salt. Now you'll note I've got half of that here because I've got half a pound, but we just put that in with the water and the brown sugar. We also want some allspice. Allspice comes in whole pods, and you want to use the whole pods for this. For a pound, you'd use 6 or 5 or 6. For half a pound, 3. Just put the pods on a cutting board and give them a little crush, and then put them into your brine. Once you've got it in the brine, we're going to be going over the stove to heat it up and dissolve the brown sugar. I've put the brine on a burner and I've got it set on high, and you just want to stir it until it starts to look brown and a little clear. It should only take about 1 minute. And then there we go. It's all dissolved. You can't see any crystals in there. Here's my nice little piece of wild sockeye salmon. You can use any salmon you like, but the higher the quality, the better the result. You'll note when you get a fillet of salmon from the store that there's little bones that run right along there that stick up on parts of it. You could leave them in, but they're just kind of nasty for whoever's eating your salmon. So we're going to wash up a pair of homemade pliers and just grab the bones and pull them out. It just makes for a nicer product. Now it's possible that one of these bones, like that one there just did, the end will pull off and you can't get a grip on it again. Just let it go. But try and get as many of them out as you can. As you get down closer to the tail, there won't be any down here. So I've got my pin bones out. Now let's cut it into chunks because candied salmon's normally served cold as an appetizer in small pieces. So cut it to a size you like. I like to give a nice one. Now the skin's going to be hard to cut through. That's just the way it is. So cut it into chunks. Now when it gets a little thinner like this, I like it to be a bit bigger chunks because they're getting less fish in the thin pieces. And we just have it cut into chunks. So I'm just going to bring over the brine we made, and I'm going to put the fish in a container I can cover overnight and pour the brine over the top of it. Now that's got to sit in the fridge overnight, and it'll be stirred around once or twice overnight. So we don't have to wait around though. I have some here that I put in brine overnight, and it's ready to go outside and take to my cold smoker. I've brought my salmon out to my gas grill, and I'm going to show you a trick to turn your gas grill into a cold smoker. This device here is called a smoke generator, and what it is a perforated tube, and I've put some hardwood pellets in it. I'm going to light one end, and it's going to slowly smolder down, and give off smoke without giving off too much heat. So I'll just light up the end of it with my propane torch. You've got to let it go for a good 30 seconds to a minute. You want a good flame. And we're going to let that flame burn down so that it's just got some embers. And then we're going to give it another blast to make sure it's going well. And let that flame burn down. While it's burning down, I'm just going to move it to the bottom because I'm going to put my salmon on the top rack. It's going to be hot at that end, so make sure you lift it from this end. And there we go. Now, while that flame's burning down, I'm just going to give it a little blow. And there the flame goes out and it's giving off smoke. So I'm going to take the salmon and I'm going to put it on the top rack so that it will be exposed to the smoke without getting too hot. On a hot day, you can put a tray of ice in here to keep it even cooler because the cold seems to help the salmon take the smoke. This will be just fine though. And I'm going to smoke the salmon over cold smoke for 4 hours. You can leave this step out if you don't like very smoky salmon, but you need some smoke on candied salmon or the texture isn't right. Because the salmon in the cold smoker is going to take 4 hours, I cold smoked this salmon last night for 4 hours, and then you want to let it sit in the fridge overnight covered so that the flavor of the smoke works its way throughout the salmon. Now I'm going to put it in my hot smoker, which I've got preheated to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And you just want to put the salmon in the hot smoker. Now to make it candied salmon, you got to put something sweet on them. So you have two choices. You can mix up 2 parts of honey with 1 part of water, or you can use maple syrup. I'm going to do a little bit of both. So these ones on the right, I'm going to do with maple syrup. And I'm just going to brush them with a good layer of maple syrup. The ones on the left, I'm going to brush with 2 parts of honey and 1 part of water. And that's just a different kind of candying. And then I'm going to close that up and I'm going to smoke it in the hot smoker for between 80 minutes to 2 hours. And I'm going to brush it every 30 or 40 minutes with more of my chosen topping. You want to check when they've finished smoking to make sure the temperature is over 145 degrees Fahrenheit, and then your salmon is done. I like to let it sit overnight before I serve it because it's traditionally served cold. To avoid having to wait a couple of hours, I made some yesterday and we can go inside and taste some finished candied salmon. Here's some smoked salmon, the candied salmon I made. I made this over the last couple of days so that we can just get right into trying it. This is the honey candied salmon. This is the maple. You'll note they've got a nice shiny glisten. They've got dark spots on it. You can even smell a little bit of the smoke, which is exactly the way I like it. But the real test is, how does it taste? Well, let's try a honey piece first. I like to break it open, and you can see it's nice and dark pink throughout, and you can see that it's not really, really dry and hard. It's still got some moisture left. A really nice background smoke flavor, just a touch of sweet from the honey. Definitely a delicious piece of candied salmon. Now let's try some of the maple. Same thing, let's break it open, and you can see the same color, but it's a little darker. Just maple gives it a little darker color. Let's just give it a taste. The maple gives it a little bit of a different sweet profile, a little bit more complex. It's really whatever your preference is. But you now know that candied salmon is a wonderful dish, it's easy to make, and you can make it.
In this recipe, David made candied salmon. The ingredients used were 500 grams of salmon fillet, 175 milliliters of water, 125 milliliters of firmly packed brown sugar, 40 milliliters of salt, 3 milliliters of dried ginger, 2 dried bay leaves, 5 whole allspice pods crushed, and maple syrup or honey diluted with water. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. And as David would say, you can make it.
It's time to make it, just give it a try, 'cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of You Can Make It with David Farrell. I'm going to make something I love to make for my wife today because I love her a lot. And it's Italian, and Italian is the language of love, amore. I'm going to be making scallop fettuccine Alfredo. It's a wonderful dish. It's got a creamy cheese sauce, succulent scallops, and speaking of which, I have about 20 medium scallops here I'm going to take over to the stovetop and cook up. I have a pot of water boiling for my pasta, but I won't be using that for a second. I have heated up some butter until it's just started to brown a little bit and get a little bit of foam in there. That's 15 milliliters or a tablespoon of butter. I'm going to take the scallops and just throw them in the pan. They will cook really quickly, just 3-4 minutes at most, maybe even 2 minutes. I find the easiest way to tell when scallops are cooked is by the texture. They should just be starting to get a little firm. You really want to stay away from overcooking them or they turn rubbery. I like to keep tossing them in the butter because it coats them and gives them a nice rich flavor. Now you can see how they're just starting to get a little bit solider color and they're starting to flake apart a little bit in a few places. That's a good sign that it's close to being done. But my final test is always, if they're a little rubbery, that one is. So we're just going to give them a minute longer. Okay, now they've just got a touch of firmness. That means they're done. So we'll just set this aside for later. And we'll start by taking our fettuccine. Now I have here 190 grams or about half a box of fettuccine. I'm just going to take that and throw it into my boiling water. And it's going to take 12 to 14 minutes to cook. I've put 60 milliliters of butter into a Dutch oven over medium heat just to get it to melt. Once it's melted, I'm going to be adding some heavy cream to it. You can use whipping cream or heavy cream depending what they call it in the store where you come from. Now, as soon as the butter is mostly melted, you're going to reduce the heat on the stove to low. So we're just going to turn this down to low because we don't want to scorch our Alfredo sauce, which will have cheese in it. So we're just going to wait for the last of that butter to melt. And we're going to be adding 100 milliliters of heavy cream or whipping cream. Oh, just already it looks so rich. I just love Alfredo sauce. And we're just going to stir them together until you start to see some steam coming off of it. You can see this just starting to get some steam coming. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add our cheeses. I'm starting with a classical combination of Italian cheeses. What we have here is 60 milliliters of grated Parmesan, and here we have 25 milliliters of grated Romano cheese. This is 7 milliliters or 8 milliliters approximately of cream cheese, just gives a nice touch, and here we have 1 milliliter of garlic powder. All of that's going to go in to the pot. Now it's important you stir continuously from this point on. You can take little breaks here and there, but that cheese is going to thicken this up and it's going to melt, and if you don't keep stirring, you run the risk of getting scorching and gloppy parts. So just keep stirring it in. I just tested the pasta by tasting a little piece of it and making sure it had just a little bit of bite left. That's called al dente. So I'll be draining that in a second. But first, I'm going to put my scallops back into the sauce. And we'll just stir them in to the sauce. And that's just going to sit for a second while we drain our pasta. And then that pasta is going to come back and go into the sauce. And with that, we're just going to stir the pasta in the sauce. And believe it or not, that is pasta Alfredo with scallops, or scallop pasta Alfredo. I'm just going to take it over to the table and we're going to plate it. Now that we have our fettuccine Alfredo all cooked, you just want to put it in a nice serving bowl. And once you got it in the bowl, a little trick to make it look just a little bit nicer is to take 2 forks and put them like close to each other like that and twist it. A little bit farther apart would be better. There we go. And just twist it, and it just makes the pasta line up a bit better. And it gives it a nice bit of height. So there you have scallops fettuccine Alfredo. So we're just going to take a little bit off because I need to try some. Although I make it for my wife, this is quality control. You have to make sure you got a scallop and a little bit of pasta. The rich, luscious pasta, the firmness and great taste to the scallops. And you'll find that if you use the Romano cheese, it's got a real saltiness to it that gives it a great picante, nice salt hit. I love scallop fettuccine Alfredo, and the best part of course, is you can make it.
In this recipe, David made scallop fettuccine Alfredo. The ingredients used were 20 medium scallops, 15 milliliters of butter, 190 grams of fettuccine, 100 milliliters of heavy cream, 60 milliliters of butter, 60 milliliters of grated Parmesan, 25 milliliters of grated Romano or Emmental cheese, 8 milliliters of cream cheese, and 1 milliliter of garlic powder. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. And as David says, you can make it.
It's time to make it. Just give it a try. 'Cause you can make it like the old fat guy.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of You Can Make It. There's something that you need in your repertoire if you're going to be cooking, and that's a good, simple cookie. So what I'm going to show you how to do today is a sugar cookie. The advantage of this recipe is it is so easy that if you have children, grandchildren, nieces or nephews, and you want to cook with them, this is the perfect recipe for them because it's very easy, little hands can do it, and it makes a good cookie. You want to have a good result if you're going to start cooking with children. So all you have to do to start making sugar cookies is mix the dry ingredients together first. So what I have here is 300 milliliters or 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. And I'm just going to put that in a bowl. And on this plate, I have 4 milliliters or 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder and 2 milliliters or a half teaspoon of cinnamon. And we're just going to add them to our flour. And we'll mix them together. Now, normally when you make cookies, you have to cream butter. It takes a long time, and kids don't have much patience. This recipe does something a little different. It uses vegetable oil, canola oil or corn oil, instead of butter, so you don't have to cream it. So here I have 90 milliliters or 1/3 of a cup, plus 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil. I'm just going to put that in my stand mixer. You can do this by hand if you want, but for the kids it goes faster. And here I have 125 milliliters or half a cup of just plain sugar. And we're going to add that in there. And we just want to put our stand mixer down and give it a quick mix until it's all blended together. That's all it takes because you don't have to cream the butter. Now, we're going to add to the oil mixture 1 egg. And 2 milliliters or a half a teaspoon of vanilla. Exactly a half a teaspoon. And again, give it a mix until the egg is mixed into the mixture. And that's all it takes. So now we're going to add the dry mixtures to the oil and egg mixture. And we're just going to let it mix up into a nice cookie dough. Just take a couple of minutes on low, a couple of seconds on low actually. Once it starts to come together like this, just shut it down and get a scraper. So I'm just going to get my spatula and give the bowl a scrape to make sure we get all the ingredients in it. Take it off of the batter, off of the paddle here, and just give it a few more seconds to get the last of that little bit of flour mixed in. So now that you've got your dough mixed up, all you have to do is get your cookie sheets out. Now I've preheated my oven to 375 degrees already, and I've got 2 cookie sheets that I've sprayed with baking spray. So we'll just take the dough and put it there ready to work with, and we'll bring my cooking sheet over. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to put the cookie dough on the cookie sheets in about the size of a walnut. They will spread out, so you don't need too big a ball, and leave them about 2 inches apart. And again, this is great for kids. They get to roll the ball around. It doesn't have to be perfect balls. And kids like to mess with messy things, so a bit of cookie dough is a good thing. Now, when I was growing up, we'd eat this cookie dough and lick it out of the bowls and that kind of thing. Sadly, you really shouldn't do that anymore. They found that there's salmonella in eggs. And you likely don't want to eat any mixture with raw eggs in it. So, sorry kids. The days of licking the cookie batter are most likely over. There we go. And once you've got 12 on a cookie sheet, you want them to become sugar cookies. And what makes a sugar cookie is it has a little bit of sugar glaze on top of it. And I'm going to show you how to put the sugar glaze on right now. So we'll get our dough out of the way. And I have here a plate with a couple of tablespoons of sugar on it. I'm just going to put it there to make it easier to get to. And I've got a little bit of butter and a normal drinking tumbler. Just rub the butter on the bottom of the tumbler so it gets nice and greasy. And then dip it in the sugar. And then you want to press each cookie down to about 3/8 an inch thick. Don't worry about it. It doesn't have to be exact. Just flatten it out. And again, this is fun for kids to do. You just flatten each one out. And they're now ready to go in the oven. I'm just going to do the other half of my cookie dough on the other cookie sheet now. So I've got both trays of cookies done, and these just have to go in the oven now for 10 to 12 minutes. What you're going to want to watch for is just a little bit of golden around the base of the cookie. They won't get browned on top. You just look for that brown ring around the bottom. Let's put them in a 375-degree Fahrenheit oven. So I checked the cookies after 10 minutes, and they were done. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes longer depending on your oven. Then I let the cookies sit and cool for just a couple of 3 minutes so that nobody's going to burn themselves when they taste it. And then we're just going to put them on a plate so they look pretty. And if you want to know how they're perfect, you look at the underside, and if they're nice and golden like that, your cookies are perfect. Now, our cookies are all done. They're cooled. I love cookies. I'm going to really enjoy this. This reminds me when I used to go to the bake shop and they used to give the kids a free cookie. It's sweet. It's got a touch of cinnamon. The vanilla just gives it a nice flavor. It's got a crunchy texture, but the oil makes it soft on the top. This is a delicious cookie that even kids can make, so you know that you can make it.
In this recipe, David made sugar cookies. The ingredients used were 300 milliliters of flour, 4 milliliters of baking powder, 2 milliliters of cinnamon, 90 milliliters of vegetable oil, 125 milliliters of sugar, 1 egg, 2 milliliters of vanilla, and sugar and butter for pressing the cookies. For the complete recipe, visit David's blog at oldfatguy.ca. And as David says, you can make it.